Hello and welcome to today's session on creating confidence in the primary classroom, beating imposter syndrome in school. So before we get started, as always, grab yourself a notepad and pen for me and make a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 so that you can dump your top 5 takeaways or top 5 ideas from today's session. I'm about to give you a load of information as I always do, and the last thing I want is for you to feel overwhelmed. So by writing down your top 5 takeaways as we work through, you're going to be able to digest this a little bit more easily once we are finished. So why are we here today? Why are we talking about creating confidence and beating imposter syndrome? So first of all, it doesn't really matter if you're an ECT or an experienced teacher. We all experience imposter syndrome sometimes. Maybe you are an ECT. Maybe you're going to a new school. Maybe you have challenging behavior in your class. Maybe you've been given a new role. Maybe things have changed at home. And again, it's undermined your confidence a little bit. There are so many reasons why we can feel like we lack confidence in school. And oftentimes we have comparison syndrome and we compare ourselves to our more experienced colleagues or colleagues who just simply do things differently. And that's the key word today. It's about doing things differently, not things that are necessarily better or worse. So today I'm going to talk you through 4 pieces of the confidence jigsaw. So let's get straight into number 1. Number 1 is all about breaking down the biases. Now, believe it or not, in our brains, we have a huge number of cognitive biases. These are like almost lenses that we look through, which reflects back a reality of the world, which isn't actually fact. So the first one is negativity bias. Now, this bias involves our brain giving more weight to negative information or experiences compared to positive ones. And this is so common, especially for us in school. And you can probably think of a few children who you can clearly see this in as well. Negative events have stronger feedback and a stronger impact on our emotions and our decision making. So always be aware of your inbuilt negativity bias. The second bias then is confirmation bias. So our brains tend to seek out and interpret information in a way that conforms to our pre-existing beliefs or the ways of thinking, right? So for example, if you and I were stood on a bridge and I said there's more yellow cars and you said there's more red cars, I will see the yellows, you will see the reds. So if you feel like you are an unconfident person, or if you feel that you are lacking skills or ability in a certain area, guess what? Your negativity bias is going to look for the negatives, and your confirmation bias is going to look for all the evidence that you are indeed correct. And it comes back to that quote, doesn't it? Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you are probably right. And actually, that confirmation bias will sometimes discount evidence that doesn't agree with your beliefs about yourself. So we need to be really sort of aware of that. And we need to make sure that we are pointing out the successes and the wins, which we'll come to in the next point. Thirdly, and finally, then we have our availability heuristic. So a heuristic is just a sort of cognitive shortcut, if you like. And this bias occurs when we judge the likelihood of an event as being more likely. Essentially, it's more likely to happen based on whether that event has happened before. So for example, if you've ever stood in front of a class and frozen up, or if you've ever had a tricky piece of behavior to deal with and you've really struggled, if you've ever tried to deliver a staff meeting and it hasn't gone well, because you've had those experiences in the past, your brain will sort of bring those memories up. It's kind of like, bringing the data from the hard drive, if you like. It's bringing the memories back to the forefront of your mind, and will basically catastrophize those memories, and will try and forecast, the brain will try and forecast that it's going to happen again. So between the negativity bias, the confirmation bias, and your availability heuristic, it is really clear to see why sometimes the biases in the brain can hold us back when it comes to confidence. But simply by being aware of them, we can start to work through them. So a really powerful quote that I love: your perspective will either become your passport or your prison. So it's either going to keep you stuck in your prison, or it's going to allow you to be, it's going to be the ticket that's going to allow you to move on to the next part of your journey. Your perspective will either become your prison or your passport. And I love that. Again, it's all in the way that we look at things, which leads us on to part 2. So the second step, once you've broken down those biases and you understand how your brain is being a little bit tricky, let's just say, step 2 is to celebrate our successes. And confidence is basically our belief in our abilities and in our own identity. Our abilities: I have the skills, I have the knowledge that to be successful in the thing, I can do it. And our identity might come back to self-worth, self-respect, things like that, self-esteem. And therefore, because it comes from the evidence of those things, we need to show the brain the evidence. As we know, we've already got a negativity bias and a confirmation bias, which are continuously working against us. So what we need to do is we need to manually override that, and we need to put the spotlight on all of the evidence that we are amazing at what we do, and all of the evidence that we can handle whatever challenges we're coming across. So we need, like I said, we need to counteract these biases. And by doing this slowly, bit by bit, and I'm going to show you how in a second, slowly, bit by bit over time, we can literally rewire the structure of the brain so that negativity bias is a little bit weaker, and we can literally start to point out the positives and shine that spotlight on the positives that we see today, day to day, literally by rewiring the brain, which is something that I find absolutely fantastic. And the way to do this, as I say, is to focus on your wins. Every time that you see a success and you manually bring your attention to that success, you're going to get a little bit of a dopamine hit, and you're going to get a bit of a sense of pride. Now, pride is different to confidence. It takes time to build because you need to be really comfortable in who you are to experience pride. I can imagine listening now, you might feel it quite tricky to sit with pride, potentially sometimes. So how can we draw our attention to these wins? How can we celebrate these successes? So I have 3 questions that I try to ask myself every night as I get into bed. And sometimes it's a conversation in my head. Sometimes I write it down in a journal. And the 3 questions are: what went well today? What am I proud of? What am I looking forward to tomorrow? Simply by answering those 3 questions, I end my day on a positive. It's been shown to improve the quality and quantity of our sleep. It's been proven to improve our mood the next morning as well. And for our purposes today, it's going to help us focus on the positives. Another great one is a gratitude jar. So particularly focused on you and your successes. Pop a little post-it note in a gratitude jar at the end of every day. By the end of the week, you'll have 7. By the end of the month, you'll have 30 or more. And you will be able to look at that jar and see all of your successes, all of the competency that you do have in your role. You could try ending the day with a win. So on the drive home or the walk home, maybe you could think of one success from the day. If you do have, like I say, those questions or a gratitude jar, try to start the day by looking at one of them and just focusing on the successes of the previous day, just to start your day on the right note. You might on your desktop keep a success folder. So maybe you screenshot an email that's given some really great feedback, or you put a photocopy or a digital copy of an amazing lesson observation. Or if a child gives you a really lovely note, that's really heartfelt, maybe you can take a picture of that and store it on your desktop. Or maybe you keep a paper folder of that. If you need to, if these things aren't so forthcoming, if you find this quite difficult, try to get some honest feedback from colleagues or feedback from loved ones, which again, highlight your successes. Another quote for you: when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. It is all in perspective. You and I can stand on the playground, we're looking down at a number, I see a 6, you see a 9. It is all in the way we look at things. Our thoughts are not facts. So if you do have these limiting beliefs about yourself, take them to thought court. Ask yourself, would this stand up in a court of law? What would the jury decide? Where is the evidence? Like we are building evidence for positives, we can also break down the fact that we don't actually have that much evidence for our limiting beliefs and lack of confidence. Moving on to number 3, once you have broken down the biases, celebrated your successes on a regular basis, you can then identify the improvements that you need to make. So by doing this, by looking at lesson observations, by taking feedback from our adults in the classroom or asking for observations and taking all this on board, we can find these practical steps. And if those practical steps are not given to you, particularly if you are newer in the career, always ask for practical steps. Someone giving you a mammoth task to improve on is not going to help if you don't have the stepping stones to get there. And a lot of the time, that's not your responsibility. Ask for the practical steps. So once you've made sense of the feedback, got some practical steps, find out what your priorities are. Where are you going to get the biggest bang for your buck? And you might think, well, this is about confidence. How is, focusing on my sort of shortcomings and where I need to improve, how's that going to help? Because by identifying your improvements and working on them, you build an unbreakable type of confidence. You build this belief in yourself that even if you find something you're not the best at, you're going to work hard and you're going to improve on it. So once you've found out what the priorities are and what's going to have the biggest bang for the buck, create some kind of structure, set some realistic goals. Now, with my clients, I'm a big fan of using what I call the minimal effective dose. What is the smallest possible version of that skill, habit, or outcome that you can try to build towards? And try to put these on a timeline. Things in school move at a million miles an hour. The term is always very, very tiring. You've got a million things to do. Try to put these small improvements, whether it's your classroom practice, your behavior practice, wider responsibilities in school, whatever it is, try and put them on a timeline to help you. Last quote for today's session, then. I love this one. You can't go back to the beginning, but you can change where you, sorry, I'll start that one again. You can't go back to the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. So this is all about those improvements, right? Yes, brilliant. It would be amazing to be born with a brain or to have learned it when we were younger and have these skills that we want to develop. But ultimately, that's not life. Ultimately, we all have things that we are not super confident in. It's about us learning to identify those improvements and to take the step. So you are where you are, that is fact, but it is up to you to rewrite your ending. The fourth and final part then of the confidence puzzle is about seeking out support. Now, we can't finish this without talking about finding your teacher tribe. So find your tribe. It might be like-minded teachers who are maybe at similar points in their career, who have had similar experiences, who you can sort of share those struggles with, and you can get feedback from someone who is on your level, let's just say. And then you might also want to seek out some role models, someone who is maybe a bit further along in their career, not, 2 decades further ahead, but someone who is a little bit closer to where you are, just a couple of steps ahead, because that wisdom and that experience is absolutely invaluable. Experience is something that we can't buy. The only way that we can sort of speed this up a little bit is by having these conversations with people and trying to learn from others' mistakes and the things that other people have learned. It's like almost downloading a book. It's almost like a bit of a cheat sheet by having these conversations, and it's going to be really, really useful. Just to finish off this session on confidence then, before we talk about your next steps, I want you to remember that, number one, you are not alone in this. Every single person out there is winging it. Every single person is floating like a duck on the surface, nice and smooth, and underneath their legs are going like this. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter how experienced they are. It doesn't matter about their career. We are all winging it day to day. And the second thing is that no one feels ready. There's never going to be a time where you feel ready for that next step or where you feel super confident. It's all about, committing and taking that step before you feel confident. That's where the growth happens. Growth always happens outside of your comfort zone. It does not happen inside it. Okay, we need to put ourselves from the comfort zone into the stretch zone, not quite the panic zone, but into the stretch zone. And that is where all the good stuff happens. Challenge breeds growth. Anyway, let's finish up now. One thing I want you to think about towards the end of this is, what are your next steps from the short session today? What do you need to go and put in place? What are your next steps from today? Pick just one thing to put in place. Make sure you've listened back to this and you've written down your top 5. I really hope this has been useful for helping you create confidence in the classroom, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.